Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is David Medina, and I'm the COO and co-founder of Results for America. Thanks for joining us for today's session, which we developed in collaboration with Bloomberg Philanthropies and the U.S. Conference of Mayors. On July 4th, President Trump signed H.R. 1 into law. This consequential law will impact virtually every industry in America and alter the way that cities and towns plan, fund, and implement infrastructure projects. Today's session will highlight the most important and relevant infrastructure provisions for cities and towns in H.R. 1, including changes to green energy tax credits and direct pay, and what it means for local clean energy and green or resilient infrastructure goals. So let's get started. I'm now pleased to welcome Dave Gatton, Director of the Council on Metro Economies and the New American City at the U.S. Conference of Mayors, who will provide an overview of H.R. 1 and introduce our policy expert presenters. Dave, thanks for the partnership all these many months and years and for joining us over today. Over to you.
Thank you, David, and we appreciate the partnership we've had with RFA and, of course, Bloomberg throughout this whole process. We start something new today, and it's the reconciliation law, or H.R. 1, or OBBB, whatever you want to call it. We thought that before we do a deep dive into the energy credits and the climate provisions, that you might find it useful for a very quick, broad summary of how the Conference of Mayors approached the reconciliation bill. First, we knew there was going to be a reconciliation bill. The 2017 tax cuts, most of them expired at the end of, or would expire at the end of this calendar year. We knew reconciliation would be real because the Republicans controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House. That's the trifecta. That makes reconciliation bills particularly attractive because the Senate only needs 51 votes as opposed to 60 votes. We also knew, given this reality, that there would be probably some bad things in this bill. But at the same time, we had to get in there and make something of it and make sure that we protected certain things. So let me review just quickly what some of those are. I think our top priority was to protect the tax-exempt municipal bond market. That's a $4 trillion market. It funds almost all of our infrastructure projects. It makes them affordable. It gives cities roughly a 200 basis point advantage, and it includes private activity bonds as well. I have lobbied probably 4 tax bills throughout my career, big tax bills, and every one of them has gone after tax-exempt municipal bonds to try to restrict them. We knew that tax-exempt bonds were, as they say, on the whiteboard, right, within the internal deliberations. So we started early. We worked with the Government Finance Officers Association and the other state and local government groups, particularly NLC. And we were successful in finding a handful of Ways and Means Committee majority Republicans to be the spearhead in mounting an effort to protect tax-exempt bonds, and we were successful. I would say that we want to thank everybody on this call whose mayors may have been a part of providing information on how important tax-exempt bond market is to infrastructure projects. We thank you all for your work on that. However, our work is not done because there will be another reconciliation bill, and everything at some point in the fall or next year will be back on the table again. So it will be important for us to be persistent. We also wanted to get provisions in to address the national housing crisis. We wanted credits that would spur production. We were able to get an expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, that will result in a 12% increase in state allocation for 9% credits. And for the 4% credits, the requirement for tax-exempt bond financing will move from 50% to 25%. These are permanent changes. They don't expire. But it should make LIHTC deals easier to find private activity bond allocations. Thirdly, there is a new round, actually permanent round of opportunity zones in the bill. We worked very closely with the first Trump administration on opportunity zones, and we hope to do so in the second term. One of the changes is they are tightening the requirements for thresholds that must be met to make sure that the zones are serving low and moderate income households, and also reporting requirements. As many of you may know, the first round of opportunity zones did not have reporting requirements. And so we have a lot of cities out there that did not know how much opportunity zone investments were being made in their city. And we hope that is rectified. Fourthly, this is very important, we had the expansion of the child tax credit. Under the American Rescue Plan, the bump up in the child tax credit resulted in a 40% decrease in child poverty. So we have a test case right in front of us that's only 3 or 4 years old that shows us that the CTC has a direct impact on children. Without renewing the child tax credit, at the end of the year, the credit would fall back to $1,000 per child. This bill has in it $2,200 per child, and starting in 2026, indexed going forward. It's the first time benefits under the CTC have been indexed for inflation. The big issue of the state and local tax deduction, this impacts some of you more than others. In the 2017 bill, there was a $10,000 cap put on the amount by which you could deduct state and local government taxes. In this bill, that has increased to $40,000 per joint return, indexed through by inflation through 2029, but goes away in 2030. So the Conference of Mayors' position on that is that there shouldn't be any cap on state and local taxes out of a federalism issue and to avoid double taxation. And then, of course, there are bad things in this bill, really bad things. The Medicaid cuts, and coupled with not extending certain tax credits to subsidize Affordable Care Act premiums, will result, according to the CBO, in 10 million people losing their health care, and will raise for the federal treasury $1 trillion over the next 10 years. That is a massive, massive cut. And there's all sorts of issues related to hospitals we won't go into now. There are significant cuts in food stamps. States will be required, or at least they'll have the decision to stopgap these cuts in food programs and Medicaid. And then, of course, there's the energy credits and climate, which are the topics for today. I will add that this bill will result in a $3.4 trillion increase to the national debt through 2034. The tax cut itself would result in a $4.4 trillion debt, but then, of course, they apply the $1 trillion of added revenues from the Medicaid and food program cuts to say that those net out at a $3.4 trillion deficit. Now, it's really more impactful than that because the tax cuts in this bill are made permanent. They do not expire in 10 years. Yet the revenue loss or contribution to the deficit only is calculated through 2034. So when we say that this will cost the deficit to increase $3.4 trillion, it's $3.4 trillion permanently until they change the tax code again. How does that impact you? Now we're really talking long term. At some point, hopefully not soon, hopefully not ever, the bond market will tell us when the country has too much debt. And it will tell us that by dramatically increasing interest rates, which of course will dramatically impact our ability in the long run to build infrastructure. I'll stop there. But we thought it would be important and interesting for you to hear sort of the big picture. And now I would like to introduce our two speakers on this specific topic at hand. Amy Turner is from the Sabin Center. She works on the Climate Law Initiative and is a research scholar at Columbia Law School. Amy, welcome. And then we have Matt Stevens-Rich from the Electrification Coalition. He is the director of their programs there. Both of them are going to do a deep dive into the bill's provisions for energy credits and climate. We welcome them. And Jamie is going to come in from Bloomberg following this to hopefully manage a robust Q&A session after they speak. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Dave. And thank you all for having me here. Thank you to Results for America and to Bloomberg Philanthropies for having me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened in this reconciliation bill with respect to clean energy as it pertains to local governments, other entities as well, but local governments is the focus here. This law will transform a lot of the ways that we have learned to do clean energy work at the local level over the last couple of years. I think it's really part and parcel of the way things have been shifting in Washington for the last 6 months or so. So I'm going to walk through some of specifically what happened in the reconciliation law. Oh, yes, I can definitely speak louder. Sorry about that. Some considerations for you all to take forward with you. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this piece of legislation is actually titled the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I think folks are still trying to figure out what to call it. The OBBB Act, HR1, I think is probably simplest. And that's what I will generally refer to it as, but you can't hear me?
Can hear you, Amy. It's okay.
You can. Okay. I'm seeing chatter. I'm doing my best. So yeah, HR1 I think is probably what we'll generally call it, but you'll see it referred to as a range of different titles. So HR1 was signed into law on July 4th, following quite a bit of back and forth among Congress over the preceding weeks. As Dave mentioned, it extends the 2017 tax cuts, slashes a whole range of social programs like Medicare. It also makes really significant changes to clean energy tax credits and some federal funding programs in the clean energy space. And I want to just name right up front, it's been about 2 weeks maybe since this has been passed into law. I think advocates and experts are still very much parsing through how it's going to play out, what some of this means. So, Matt and I will do our best to tell you what we know, tell you what's out there, point you to resources, and be generally continuing to study and put out information on this law as time goes forward, because there's a lot in there, and a lot of what's to come, I think, really depends on decisions that agencies make going forward. So next slide, please. So One of the things that our community of practice has focused very much on over the last several years is elective pay for tax credits. Elective pay, of course, is the mechanism in the tax code passed in the IRA that allows local governments and other non-taxable entities like states and nonprofit groups to claim the value of certain climate and clean energy tax credits in cash. Elective pay, as well as a related concept called transferability that allows private parties to transfer tax credits from one to another, those things are not touched by H.R. 1. They remain the law. But the underlying tax credits are significantly impaired. So, effectively, we might have quote won on elective pay, but there's still, the ability to actually claim tax credits via elective pay has been significantly diminished by the underlying changes to the tax code that happened in HR 1. Next slide, please. So I'll dive into some of the specifics because I think this is really, what folks are most interested in. What do these changes in the tax code mean for, deadlines and other parameters around taking tax credits? So for electric vehicles, there's a commercial electric vehicle tax credit under Section 45W of the tax code, allows businesses and non-taxable entities to claim tax credits of up to $7,500 for small vehicles, $40,000 for large vehicles. This tax credit will sunset on September 30th of this year. So that's in about 2 months and 9 days. Effectively what this means is that, the reconciliation bill is looking to phase down the clean vehicles tax credit as soon as possible. And Matt is going to talk to you about what does that actually mean on the ground? What can we do in the next 2 months and 9 days? There's also an electric vehicle charging credit. It allows local governments and other non-taxables to collect 30% of the costs for EV chargers in low-income and non-urban area census tracts. That credit is being sunsetted on June 30th, 2026. So you've got about a year, a little less than a year, to claim the tax credit for EV chargers. Next slide, please. On the solar and wind energy side, this is where it gets quite a bit more complicated. There's ostensibly more time, but you're really very, very limited in how you're able to claim these tax credits. So there are two, kinds of tax credits at play with solar and wind energy. There's the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. The investment tax credit allows you to recoup a certain amount of the costs of your clean energy project. The production tax credit allows you to collect a tax credit every year for 10 years for energy that you produce with your project. Both of these are significantly impaired by HR 1. The tax credits ostensibly remain in place through December 31st, 2027, which is a significantly shorter amount of time than they initially remained in the tax code under the IRA, but still seems like, about 2 years to claim those credits. However, there are significant restrictions that kick in for solar and wind energy following the end of this year. So on January 1st, 2026, a kind of rule called foreign entity, a set of rules called the Foreign Entity of Concern, or FEOC rules, will take effect. The FEOC rules are quite complex. I'm not going to delve into the details of them, though I will point you to resources. But they essentially ask the taxpayer who is collecting the tax credit, or the non-taxable entity collecting the rebate via elective pay, to look very deep into their supply chain to make representations about where certain elements of their projects have come from, and in particular to ensure that elements of projects and financial assistance for projects are not coming from 4 countries, China being probably the most relevant one when we talk about the solar supply chain. So what this means is, so essentially, if you want your project not to have to worry about the FEOC rules, you're going to want to start construction on your project before the end of this year. So in the next 4 to 5 months, you're going to want to start construction on your project to avoid the FEOC rules. For projects that are able to comply with the FEOC rules, they are able to do that complex analysis around supply chains and financial assistance for their projects. Those projects will either need to commence construction by July 4th, 2026, so about a year from now, after which point they'll have 4 years to complete the project, or be fully placed in service, be done and turned on by the end of 2027. So it's kind of a tripartite analysis. You want to avoid FEOC completely, start your project before the end of this year. If you are able to comply with FEOC for wind and solar, you either want to commence construction by a year from now, by July 4th, 2026, or have your project fully complete by December 31st, 2027. If you have projects that are sort of like you're pushing to get them started, it might happen this year, it might happen next year, I would really, really try to get those projects started this year in order to avoid the FEOC rules. Next slide, please. So FEOC and commencing construction are both really complex topics, and this is kind of where we don't totally know what we don't know yet, but we have partners that are starting to put out really helpful resources. So the foreign entity of concern rules, like I said, very complex, require pretty deep analyses of supply chains. The specific countries that are foreign entities of concern are China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. But China, of course, is the country that is the biggest player in the solar and battery and other clean energy supply chain areas. We're expecting further guidance from Treasury on this, which sort of just adds to the confusion at this stage. We're not entirely sure how this is going to be implemented. I have found the best resources on FEOC to be from the NYU Tax Law Center, and I have linked to two resources from the Tax Law Center in these slides, and I believe these slides will be shared with you. If you are looking at a complicated project that you're not sure where to start with the FEOC rules, you can start with these resources, but you're going to want to get independent analysis. Commencing construction is also a pretty complicated concept. So there are two ways in which a project can, quote, commence construction. They can follow a physical work test, which means that, just what it sounds like, there is significant physical work happening on the project. Or they can meet what's called the 5% safe harbor. So essentially, the project can have spent 5% or more of the total cost of the project, and this is much more complex than I'm making it sound. Just these two simple sounding tests. This is something where, again, if you are sort of on the cusp of whether or not you are starting construction, you're going to want to get outside legal or other guidance to help you determine whether you have passed cost or the 5% safe harbor. Two really good resources, the Solar Energy Industries Association and Lawyers for Good Government, both have put out explainers on the commence construction tests and what the physical work test and the 5% safe harbor test really mean, and that breaks those things down. So I would point you to those resources as a starting point. Next slide, please. Things look a little better for geothermal and battery storage.
Oh, shit.
Oh, can everyone put themselves on mute, please? For technologies that are not solar and wind, what's kind of strange about the ITC and the PTC is that they specifically carve out solar and wind for this kind of worse treatment in terms of timeline. So for technologies that are not solar or wind, the ITC and the PTC remain in place in full through 2033. And then they do go down in value a bit, 75% in 2034 and 50% in 2035. But you have a much, much longer runway for projects that are not solar and wind. FEOC does apply to these projects. And, I think there's a lot of learning to be done around where the supply chains sit in technologies like battery storage and geothermal My broad understanding is that the battery storage supply chain, much of it is in China, but the industry may start to onshore that in response to HR1. On the geothermal side, the supply chain might be more domestic, but you're still going to have to do the FEOC analysis. You're still going to have to look at your supply chain and make sure that you're complying with FEOC rules. One interesting bright spot in all of this is that a different section of the tax code that contains the investment tax credit that's often taken for ground source heat pumps did not have FEOC added to it. So I think there's quite a bit more work to be done here to scope out what it might look like to do these very small, you could call them geothermal, but more like ground source heat pump projects in a way that does not give rise to FEOC concerns. It would give rise to other, domestic content considerations and things like that, but it would not specifically give rise to the FEOC rules. Next slide, please. So there are a number of other tax incentives that are not eligible for elective pay that are also significantly impaired by HR1. Just like the commercial clean vehicles credit, the individual facing vehicles credits, both for new and used vehicles, phase out as of September 30th of this year. So you're going to have residents that are, scrambling to either get EVs before that date, or just you're not going to see the benefit of this tax credit going forward. There are tax credits for home energy efficiency and electric appliances, for rooftop solar, and those both phase out at the end of the year. So those are fairly popular tax credits that homeowners use to upgrade their buildings. There's a green housing tax credit that will phase out about a year from now, June 30th, 2026, and the commercial buildings energy efficiency tax deduction also phases out at the end of June of next year. These are not things that local governments would take directly, but obviously they significantly play into the decarbonization of the transportation sector and the building stock in localities. And so, that's going to be a loss for all of us that residents and businesses are not able to claim these incentives. Next slide, please. So turning away from the tax code just for a moment, there are obviously significant changes to the tax code, but another thing that happens in HR1 is that Congress rescinds unobligated funds under several Inflation Reduction Act programs, including ones that local governments have received grants on. This is just a short list of programs that have had some of their funding rescinded, but they include environmental justice block grants, climate pollution reduction grants, DOT's Neighborhood Access and Equity Program. So to be clear, rescission of unobligated funds, within the textually, I should say, within sort of the four walls of the statute, refers to a relatively small number of dollars. This is basically administrative funding that hasn't been spent yet. It's not a huge amount that's being rescinded, but I think it does give cover to agencies to perhaps, do more as they are, seeking to terminate or otherwise slow walk grant amounts. The rescission of the unobligated dollars could give them cover to do that. It also might mean that the offices that manage these programs, that you all have contact directly if you are grantees under these programs, might be understaffed or unstaffed, meaning that it's not entirely clear how these programs could be managed going forward. That, of course, could give rise to a grantee having difficulty complying with the terms of their grants, making reports, things like that. So this is another area where it's not entirely clear how the rescission of these unobligated dollars is going to play out in practice, what sort of ripple effects it's going to have. But it is something that we're watching closely. The Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which of course is the IRA's green banking program, had its unobligated balance rescinded, which again was not a ton of money in the grand scheme of things. But it also saw the repeal of the underlying GGRF program. So HR1 actually repeals the relevant section of the Clean Air Act where the GGRF is housed. And this could have significant implications for the GGRF program. From a legal perspective, the fact that the program has been repealed does not mean that dollars that have been obligated to the grantees under contract should be unobligated. But we've already seen the administration claim in court, for example, that effectively should be the case. So we're seeing quite a bit of kind of funny business happening around the GGRF. Local governments are not direct grantees under GGRF. And, we wouldn't expect local governments to very frequently be direct borrowers under from GGRF awardees, but these are obviously dollars that otherwise would be flowing into your communities for green programs. Next slide, please. So just a couple of takeaways to kind of send you away with here. What can you do in response to HR1? What does this actually mean for you on the ground? So on the tax credit side, elective pay remains the law. If IRS is processing returns, we've seen indications that they are continuing to host office hours to help, elective pay claimants get answers to their questions. If you have projects that you've completed in 2024 or 2025 that qualify, you are entitled by law to a credit. This is not retroactive. So please use those credits and file for elective pay, get as many of those dollars back as possible. Then, in terms of projects that are not complete or not started, consider the timing, the new rules around the credits, and think about how that might impact your future or in-process projects. For clean energy projects, solar and wind, if there is any way to move up the commencement of construction on those projects prior to the end of this year, that's going to put you on much better footing with respect to the foreign entity of concern requirements. If you are not able to do that, you're going to want to think about how to shape your project given those FEOC restrictions. On the grant side, HR1 does not change anything about obligated grant funds or your contracts. Even though they have rescinded these administrative funds that could make your grant management much more difficult, it does not actually implicate your grant agreements. Now, of course, there's a lot happening in the background with respect to your grant agreements. Grants are being terminated, often unlawfully. Folks are being shut out of payment portals. They're unable to get in contact with their agency representatives. So there's a lot happening on the grant side, but from a general perspective, HR1 doesn't change your grant agreements or the fact that dollars have been obligated to you, and you can continue as you have been, either in the happy management and implementation of your grant, or in continuing to push an agency or the administration to make grant dollars available to you. One last thing I'll note before I sign off is that, I've really focused on implications for local governments here, but folks within your communities are really going to feel all of this as well. Tax credits are going away for local residents, businesses, and community groups. But this is also really going to increase energy prices really significantly, among other bad outcomes like more pollution and more health impacts. Energy prices are projected to go up pretty much everywhere as a result of this law. And so you may find that you have more residents experiencing energy insecurity. You may find that it becomes more important or more desirable to procure energy outside of the normal utility process. This is really just going to sort of change what the on-the-ground situation looks like in a lot of your communities. So that's all I have prepared for you. I think that I'm turning things over to Matt, and I will be here for questions. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much, Amy. Thanks, Dave, for the kind introduction. And thanks most of all to everyone dialing in here. Like Amy set the table well. We're at, 2 weeks and a couple days over since everything got signed in. There definitely is a lot of, you're part of the creative process as a lot of this guidance and content is coming together. So biggest recommendation is showing up, which you're already doing, but also staying in tuned as more content comes out. Raise your hand for those questions as we go through. If you jump to the next slide, and even the slide after that, we'll go right in on tax credits. And so Amy did a phenomenal job covering all the credits to affirm. There's a lot of content here that we're getting out the door. If I have some simplest takeaways to that, and just as we've also been threshing through, okay, what happens and when is that updated milestone? Above all else, we're just on an accelerated timeline for retirement programming. Even going in 3 weeks ago, there was chance that there would be some longer timing in terms of those phase outs. So just paying attention to that project, as Amy was affirming, if you have a specific project you've already deployed or something you're looking to still get in the ground or in service by the end of the year, take a look at if you can meet that accelerated timeline and updated timing. And the simplest next step, just in terms of, okay, great, I do have that thing. What do I do next, especially if I'm buying an electric vehicle? You make the purchase now. Yeah, we're at just over 2 months out. That's 69 days till September 30th. That doesn't mean in the electric vehicle and charging station context that you can't make that type of deployment happen. But what it does mean is that it's really important to take a look at that procurement timeline, work with your local partners. We have plenty of resource there and also can help even talk that through. But above all else, making that purchase now is going to be the biggest priority. As we were covering in those slides, we're not just thinking about what's the date for when a tax credit program phases out, but also what do you need to do by then? What's the verb? What's the action that needs done? In some cases, such as for the personal EV tax credit, the new or used EV tax credit, you just have to make the purchase by September 30th. But for fleet-specific application, the 45W tax credit, we need to purchase and have it in service. So 2 action steps that need to take place there. We have a lot of, so I have some QR codes I'll be dropping through these slides. We'll also be weaving links in the chat as Jamie's been dropping them in there. But that's to say, above all else, affirming all the resource, all the things you would need to get started, it already exists. The best news of all, there are some updated guidance that we'll need to get out as a part of the 2025 tax filing year. That is, the forms don't exist yet. We will be getting updated guidance at the end of the year. But in terms of what you need to start moving now, that already exists. It's already out there, and there's great partners there to also even talk through your specific project. So the first link I'll point you to, it's called the Elective Pay Blueprint. It was actually funded through the Department of Energy, really focused at municipal needs and what they need to navigate all the respective elective pay eligible tax credit programs. So what Amy was covering, it was written between Electrification Coalition, Government Finance Officers Association, Lawyers for Good Government, and World Resource Institute. So it was a bringing together of the brain trust across all of our specialties to make one singular document to navigate how you would be, what forms you need to file, how you would be navigating that and proceeding that way. So QR codes there. We'll also drop the links in the chat as we're going. On the next slide, we'll jump into the often asked questions, and that's to say this is a dynamic slide, as we've been presenting it a couple of times over, and we continue to update this, especially with just those off the bat questions on, okay, I do have an electric vehicle, I have a charging station that I'm looking to deploy. What do I need to do, or those types of things? So first thing, as Amy was sharing in the who is eligible to file and apply, again, elective pay, also known as direct pay, it's eligible for all public and nonprofit entities eligible to file. The tax credits, if they're also fully fileable for a private fleet as well. So in terms of who is filing in terms of that for elective pay, we're still going to be really focused on municipalities, nonprofit entities, but even state agencies or other types of transit authority and others alike. The what does in service mean? Amy alluded to this a little bit in her introductory comments. It is loosely defined. So this is specific to the 45W tax credit. Again, we need to have the electric vehicle purchased and in service by September 30th. We've never gotten a specific clear definition, but ideally, so to set a bar of if you can do this, this is really great and really makes it a very easy paper trail. Ideally, we want to have documentation of your vehicle being in possession or on the books, as it were, for the fleet by September 30th. What that looks like is it can be anything from, if you have the vehicle being shipped to you, it is a signed off receipt that the vehicle is indeed delivered, or even paperwork coming from the dealer or whomever you're purchasing through. I share this as examples of this isn't necessarily the letter that you need to be meeting, but we need some type of documentation to prove not just the purchase by date, but also the taken delivery of. if you're looking at a project that maybe it's coming in right on that September 30th date, or it's like a week out from that, and you're just seeing that date and that's a little bit irksome, or you're trying to just make sure you're mitigating all possible ways to be sure you hit that, give us a call. We have a couple other options that we can definitely talk through. For instance, there are ways you can take delivery of that or be sure you have it on your books ahead of the September 30th date, even if it's not on property. And these are ways that fleets often sometimes have to manage insurance issues or other types of liability concern. So it's, as can often be the case, there can be a case-by-case basis here. So more than happy to connect and talk through your specific project and what you're looking at in terms of making sure you can show that vehicle as in service. I was sharing the story with Jamie earlier on, we've even worked with some fleets where they had to drive the vehicle physically to their location. That indeed is taking it into service, even if it's not in territory. And also too, what risk do you have? If I guarantee my tax return is a very fair question to be asking right now. While tax returns, grant programs, and other incentives are not necessarily 100% guaranteed, we can definitely affirm the sooner you act, the greater the likelihood that you're able to maximize your tax credit. And also to affirm, as we've continued to work with municipalities using the elective pay program throughout last year and this year, I am glad to report those rebate checks, those reimbursement checks have continued to be received even past January 20th. If there's the honest holdup, it's that the IRS is slow to still process. So often it's just a delay on their side for that processing. But again, a lot of great resource that already is out there and happy to guide through. On the next slide, a couple other links to point to. So again, back to elective pay blueprint. Some of the comment questions dropping in the chat, it's everything from annotated tax forms or even just that step-by-step guidance. Again, I will gladly point back to elective pay blueprint, but also on the next slide, specific to the EV and charging tax credits, over on our main webpage for the Electrification Coalition, we also have annotated tax forms and flowcharts for if you're purchasing EV or charging tax EV projects. Something that's already been mentioned, gratefully, these projects, while they are first up for phase out, they are gratefully straightforward versus the more complex renewables or storage type of projects. But there are still some decision points that need to be made, and also being sure you're filing out the correct paperwork. So again, we have updated guidance there through tax filing year 2024. We will create new updated guidance for 2025 as that becomes available and as we get those flowcharts. But that's to say, always happy to talk through any specific things. Biggest thing to take to your team, we need to be sure we're getting that purchase done for vehicle tax credits before September 30th. And we also have to have our plan of action for how we're going to document it as in service. So, there's a lot of ways that can happen. It could literally be you are walking down to your local dealer because you are thinking about that Chevy Equinox to still hit the books the end of the year. Go buy it, go take delivery of it, drive it back. Congratulations. That is a very fileable tax credit. But again, acknowledging there might not be a local dealer with in-stock inventory. We're more than happy to connect you with other procurement partners as well, which on the next slide, kind of jumping ahead of myself there. So just some other things to throw out there. Again, obviously with vehicles, you're going to be buying through a dealership or looking at that type of option. If you're feeling stuck or not knowing exactly how you need to fulfill that, here to help. We run a program separately, but totally inserts here nicely, called Drive EV Fleets. It's a cooperative purchasing platform. So we run it with our partners over at Sourcewell that many might be familiar with, who is a government purchasing agency that works nationally. It's all built on the premise of having competitively bid contracts that any partner, any public or nonprofit entity can use. So basically still meets the competitive bid requirements often needed. We do have vehicles on contract there, as well as charging infrastructure, putting it out there as another option in case you're just needing to think about looking at those options. I'm also glad to report, and we continue to work with our partners, there are vehicles in stock and on lot. So we do have that time to be able to move those vehicles around. So Drive EV Fleets is the main site. Again, a lovely QR code. I know a lot of links are coming out here too. So I have a little bit of a bulleted form here too. I just dropped in the chat of some of those immediate off the bat pieces. But again, simplest simplest thing to be taken away specific to the EV tax credit. September 30th, that's our first deadline approaching here. And if you're really sweating that date or really need to think through those options, more than happy to connect with your team to talk that through. So I believe the next slide is my contact, yes, which I also dropped as the last bullet there too.
That's great. Matt, Amy, Dave, thanks for your clear yet sobering presentations today. Thank you. I would now like to note for all of you here today that we have a summary of what's been presented that we're going to drop in the chat. Please take a look at that. Please take a look at all the links that Amy and Matt have shared as well. Share those with your teams as you prepare to align your planning and grant-making processes for your infrastructure projects with federal funding priorities. I'd now like to introduce Jamie Lavin, one of our partners from Bloomberg Philanthropies Government Innovation Team, who'll facilitate our question and answer session today. Please drop your questions in the chat, and please note that the questions we'll be focusing on today are related to infrastructure. We know there are a lot of provisions in HR 1. The questions we'll try to get through today are related to infrastructure. Over to you, Jamie.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Amy and Matt. I constantly turn to Amy and Matt whenever I need to unpack what's happening in this space, and their guidance is so valuable and practical, which I love. We have gotten a lot of questions, so we'll start, but please keep them coming. As David said, we're going to try to really focus on the areas that we've been covering today, but we will have future programming on some of the other things that are happening, whether in HR 1 or otherwise in the infrastructure space. So if it doesn't get answered today, we'll get it answered at some point. I think the first question I saw was from East Providence, and it touched on something, Amy, that you discussed, which is those funds that have been rescinded under the Act. Their city received an urban and community forestry grant. Congratulations, has been managing it. And they asked whether unobligated funds from that program would be rescinded as part of this law. I think you touched on it, but if you could just, maybe being able to distinguish between those that have a fully signed grant agreement and those that don't.
Sure. Well, after I finish answering this question, let me take a minute and pull up the list of programs that was impacted, because I just don't have the full list in front of me. But in general, so, funds that have been, obligated by contract should not be caught up in this unobligated rescission. So if you have a good contract that says, that you are granted this much money, that should not be impacted here. What I think this opens the door for, and it's not within the four walls of the law itself. What I think this opens the door for is kind of a lot of funny business around whether dollars that have been challenged in some way, right? Your grant agreement has been terminated, you think, unlawfully. The agency goes through what it says to be a process to deobligate dollars, whether or not that's really what it's supposed to do. There's just a lot that is going to play out here in terms of like what the end goal is with this rescission of unobligated dollars. So I don't have like a super satisfactory answer for you here if you're in a position where your grant award has been terminated or challenged in some way. All I can say is that, from a legal perspective, the rescission of unobligated dollars, I would not think would impact those contracts, even if they're in some liminal state. But we're not in sort of normal times where I can give that answer with any amount of confidence. But maybe Jamie can ask the next question to Matt, and I'll pull up the list of programs just to double check whether urban and community forestry was on there.
That's great. Thank you. So one of the questions or comments, I should say, that we got from Nikki Vandevort, thank you, Nikki, was whether you need to get the vehicle's registration date as a way of placing a vehicle in service.
Yes, thanks for flagging that, Nikki. I responded to that into the comments too. Yes, as a part of the filing process, there's an online portal that you file on the IRS web portal. So again, here to help, especially if this is the first time that you've been navigating that but you would be filing that online, and you do need the vehicle identification number that you'd be filing for that. So more than happy to connect on if you're getting stuck on what to file in there. There's also some additional filings there too. The flow charts that I mentioned, we also talk about that there too, just to be sure you're gathering all the detail and then that lining that up with the different forms and intake that's needed too. So yes, you do need to, above all else, need to be sure we're purchasing before September 30th, not trying to file for all these things, or rather make purchase orders after the 30th. There's some time there for filing that, but the urgency at this point is just that September 30th date for being sure we make the purchase order and also have it in service.
And Matt, I hear you keep saying purchase. We got a question whether a leasing is eligible for the EV credit.
Yes, leasing is eligible. You just need to make sure we know who is filing for it, because your dealer also can file for it too. But yes, lease is also eligible for that too.
And do you all, Matt, have any resources, or are you putting together any resources that are sort of resident facing about those residential credits that you also mentioned in terms of people buying EVs for their home?
Yeah, we usually stay on the fleet side, so public and private fleet side of the implementation and technical work. So yes, we are getting that alert out as well. And we gladly also point to Plug in America. Our friends over there work more on the consumer side as well as Forth. There's actually a lot of good content getting out on the residential side. That is more open and shut. It is just a purchase that needs to be done. And gratefully, that tax credit can be dealt with right at the point of sale, so the dealer can file for it. So it's a more straightforward case for that consumer focused purchase.
Amy, okay if I turn back to you?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So we got a few questions on FIAC, and I know I'm not gonna push you to answer FIAC questions, but maybe we'll sort of put those out there, and we can talk about what we are able to answer now and what we would suggest people seek other counsel for. We got a question: is it reasonable to expect an RFP process could include that solar installers meet FIAC rules, or are the FIAC rules expected to be too stringent for most solar suppliers to meet? Otherwise, they would need to move ahead without an RFP process, which would make them uncomfortable considering public procurement rules.
Yeah, so I mean, ideally, assuming this is workable in any sense, you would want to put on your suppliers, or on others, on your construction firm compliance with FIAC rules. Like, you fully want to offload that via contract to your suppliers. Um, Honestly, I don't know how workable that's going to be. It probably depends on which particular kind of technology. Obviously the solar and battery supply chains are pretty deep in China, but other technologies may be less so. It's really hard to say at this early stage how this is all going to play out, particularly if some industry players are looking to onshore some of these operations to make them more FIAC compliant. But to sort of put to answer a question you didn't exactly ask, but are getting at, like, ideally you are putting this on your suppliers via contract.
And I guess to that vein, let's just maybe one more time talk about that if a project is already, if you've already figured out your suppliers, right, and you already have a project underway, do you still have to meet those FIAC rules?
So if you have commenced construction before the end of this year, then no, the FIAC rules do not apply. And so that's where you want to pay really close attention to those resources around what commencing construction means. For example, if you are looking to satisfy the commence construction test via the 5% safe harbor, that is spending 5% of the project costs, you're actually going to want to spend 8 to 10% of those project costs, significantly over 5. In case you have cost overruns in the end, you're going to want to be able to say that you spent 5% of the total project costs, not just your projected project costs. So you're really going to want to look very closely at those commenced construction rules to make sure that you can say you have commenced construction before the end of this year and just keep yourself fully out of FIAC territory.
And if I can chime in a little bit, it's a tangent, but something we've also been, as we work with municipalities, it's they're buying the EV, but they're also looking at that solar deployment or others. Um, Again, just a reminder, some tuning in maybe already are working with this on federally funded projects where it's the same thing of being sure you're under performance or thinking about how how you schedule out your spend. So to all of Amy's insight, think about that moment too of there's staffing overhead, other types of costs that you can also be sure that you're adding into that also can add up to that 5% piece. So I volunteer that in case you do have a grant team or another deployment already underway. You might already be broaching this just in the being sure a project is under performance that was federally funded. And there could be some of that same deployment tactic to be used here too.
Great. And before we ask what I think will be our last question, just 'cause we're starting to run up on time, we are going to launch a poll. In this poll, you all will see that in addition to asking your usual, how do we do today? We also want to know what support you need. You know, Matt and Amy have been so generous with their and their organization's time and expertise. We have a whole consortium of partners who are just deeply, deeply committed to this work, to helping you all make progress on your climate action plan goals. We know that a lot of these credits fit into those climate action plan goals. And so please do take us up on it. If you ask for help, we will reach out to you and say, let's get you connected. Please respond to us then and let us know what we can do to make sure that you get the resources that you need to be able to put these funds to work. So the last question, Amy, Francis Donahue asked if FIAC only applies to direct pay or more broadly to government-funded solar projects.
Yeah, so it does not apply just to direct pay. It applies to certain kinds of tax credits, namely the ITC and the PTC for zero emissions clean energy projects. It's in the tax the section of the tax code that relates to those tax credits. Specifically, you are then claiming the tax credit via elective pay, but it's not that FIAC applies just to direct pay. Frankly, if it applied only to folks that claim direct pay, it might be easier to manage, right? Because now the fact that it applies to everyone means that everyone is going to be competing for the same very small sliver of the supply chain that is not based in one of these four countries.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I'm going to call for the slides. We just added a slide in. In addition to these webinars, we have been running boot camps for small and medium-sized cities on direct pay because it's not a competitive program. We've been running those for cities of all sizes. We also heard from a lot of people that a long-term boot camp doesn't work for their schedules, for their calendars, and frankly doesn't work with some of these expedited timelines. And so we are now going to be offering both a selection of boot camps specifically focused on grant implementation. As Amy's been highlighting, grants are a really tricky place right now, and we know that there's a lot of shifting priorities and requirements, and so helping to support you on those types of things, but also on just the bread and butter of federal grant implementation, which can be hard. So we're launching a grant implementation bootcamp. We also are having workshops, including a workshop on direct pay and how to make sure that if you've done any of these things, if you've put something in service in this year, that you file and get your credit. And so we're going to be we're registering for those now, and those will all be happening throughout the fall. And with that, I will turn it back over to David. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Dave, Amy, and Matt for your presentations. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. 3 quick notes before we depart. First, don't forget to complete that Zoom poll that Jamie just mentioned. That'll help us with planning for future sessions. Secondly, please note that on Tuesday, July 29th, we'll host our next webinar, and that'll be focused on scenario planning that can help you protect your services, staff, and infrastructure, even if your funding changes midstream. You can register for that webinar in the chat. And last but not least, all of the materials that we talked about today that we shared in the chat, you can also find on our website, localinfrastructure.org. So thanks for joining us today, and we hope to see you next week.